Hi, everyone. It's Mark Wasilio. I'm the MLA for Fort Garry, and welcome back to our 8th episode of the Ledge podcast, the podcast dedicated to all things provincial politics. We took a short break during the summer holidays, but we are back. And this week on the pod, we will be talking about the addictions crisis, the epidemic of overdose deaths, and the Kinew government's response to it, specifically the politics of safe consumption sites. One of the signature promises of the Kinew government in the past election was to establish Manitoba's first safe consumption site. The site they've picked is an inner-city neighborhood of North Point Douglas. But the people that live in North Point Douglas were never asked what they think, and after 2 years in government, the site of the safe consumption site is blowing up into one of the main controversies facing the Kinew government. We will get into the politics of where to put a safe consumption site, and we'll hear from Point Douglas residents themselves. Their voice has been really missing from this conversation. So we'll talk about the Point Douglas residents' encounter with Premier Kinew at the legislature and what it tells us about the government's attitude towards Manitobans' concerns. So lots to cover. Let's get into it. Manitoba is in the midst of an addictions crisis. Toxic drug supply is leading to hundreds of preventable deaths each year. And for years, the provincial government has ignored the problem. Death toll began to rise, and a problem became an epidemic. In opposition, the Manitoba NDP was a loud vocal critic. They raised the alarm and were seeking answers to save Manitoba lives. Now, Kinew was elected Premier in October 2023. That year, 445 Manitobans lost their lives to drug overdoses. In 2024, Manitoba saw the highest record number of deaths due to drug overdoses at 568 fatalities. Activists have rightly characterized this as a crisis. People are dying before they're even able to access resources. And the problem is real and getting worse. Now, the Manitoba NDP pledged during the election to open up a safe consumption site. There have been a number of sites that have opened up across Canada, and there's strong evidence that these sites do, in fact, save lives. The idea behind it is this. A drug user can go to a safe place where there's medical staff present, test their drugs to make sure that they're not tainted, use the drugs under supervision, and if they OD, there is medical staff and medication right there to react, to administer naloxone, and to save their lives. The idea is to build trust and build a community, and when these users want to clean up, at a place that they can go to where they feel safe, where there are treatment services that are offered and other supports to stabilize their lives. This is called the harm reduction model. You can't bark orders at people. You can't tell them to stop using drugs because you want them to. They have to get there themselves. And until they do, what do? So these are people who often have experienced a great deal of trauma in their lives and who are self-medicating. They may have mental health issues. And the reason they started using and becoming addicted to drugs was to help themselves deal with these issues of trauma. And you basically just can't order them to stop. That has never worked and it never will. So drug addicts have to want to quit. And what do you do before they're ready to? Well, the reality is many die before they ever get to that place in their life when they're motivated to quit. And so the idea behind safe consumption sites, it's the middle ground. It's a way to keep people alive long enough to get them to a place where they're actually ready for recovery, where they want supports, that they actually want to do the work in order to clean themselves up and move on from drugs in their life. So the first priority is to save lives, then work on the issues that lead that person to get into an addiction situation to begin with. And there seems to be expert or elite consensus in Manitoba that in order to do this, we need safe consumption sites. But in recent months, we have seen a mobile consumption site has been set up in Manitoba. We have a camper van that's run through Sunshine House that travels around through the inner city and provides safe consumption site services. In addition, the Kinew government has applied to the federal government to open up a safe consumption site in Winnipeg. Now, herein lies the controversy. Safe consumption sites have to go somewhere. And whatever neighborhood they're placed in, there are going to be collateral or negative issues that go along with them. And the site is basically designed to be a magnet. It draws drug users from elsewhere into that neighborhood. Now, they need drugs to consume at these sites, so that draws drug dealers to move into that neighborhood in order to service those clients. Now, the drug consumers need money to buy drugs. Well, they often go into the community just adjacent to the consumption site, and you see a spike in disorder, including crimes with thefts, break-ins, other property crimes, for drug users needing to get the money in order to buy the drugs. Now, the surrounding residents of a safe consumption site location then have to bear the brunt of the problems that are associated with these sites. Their family safety may be impacted, the quality of life of the neighborhood can be impacted, and therein lies the tension. So now to the Manitoba controversy. The Kinew government applied to the federal government to open up a consumption site at 200 Disraeli in the inner city neighborhood of North Point Douglas. This originally was an old, historic, wealthy neighborhood of Winnipeg, and it was along rail lines. Heavy industry came into the neighborhood, and wealthier early Manitobans and Winnipeggers moved out, and it transformed into sort of a newcomer, poorer neighborhood. Very diverse, large Indigenous and newcomer population today, very working class neighborhood, and parts of it are gentrifying. There's extensive pollution in the area, including lead contamination of the soil, and residents have been told not to even plant vegetable gardens because of the lead levels in the area. And there's a huge life expectation gap in and around the neighborhood of North Point Douglas. In fact, it has the shortest life expectancy in Winnipeg out of any neighborhood. You will die a full 18 years earlier living in that neighborhood than other parts of the city. It has one of the highest crime rates in the city, and prior to any safe consumption sites being located there, it was already struggling. And it has the highest percentage of violent crime among Winnipeg neighborhoods. So this community has its challenges. Now, both major parties have ignored these challenges and allowed things to get worse in this community. So fast forward to the drug crisis. Under the PC government in October 2022, a mobile consumption site was operated out of a camper by Sunshine House. It was operating in Point Douglas among other neighborhoods. Now, why this is important to the story is the residents of Point Douglas have already experienced with safe consumption site and what happens to the community when they come in. What they saw, they didn't like, and residents claim that there was a noticeable increase in crime in the neighborhood when drug dealers moved in following drug users who congregated to that community. There's an increase in used dirty needles on sidewalks, playgrounds with local area children finding them, and these are parents that are sharing stories of their children being assaulted or even robbed for money, property, again, by drug users in order to get the resources they need to buy drugs. Naturally, given all this, the community doesn't want this site located to the neighborhood because they know that a lot of these problems are going to get worse, not better. And the Kinew government has been silent about how it's going to deal with these issues. Now, government knows this, and they're still proceeding with opening the site at 200 Disraeli in the community. Despite claiming to be a listening government, there's been no evidence that they've actually listened to the people who live in the community. There's been no announced plans as how they plan to keep the community safe, how they plan to keep the community clean and orderly. And the irony from a political perspective is that we're talking about a neighborhood which is a safe NDP riding, that many activists who are opposed to this are hardcore NDP supporters and voters and have been for years. So the entire response from the Kinew government has been one of condescension and dismissal. They've been branding these community members as ignorant, as not in my backyard, or NIMBY activists who don't care about their neighborhood and don't care about drug-addicted people who live there. There's this perception that they have no empathy, that they're not interested in saving lives. The whole approach from this government is to talk down to people in this community and attempt to shame them into submission. Wrinkle in this story, which is interesting, is that the Minister of Addictions, Bernadette Smith, doesn't live in this riding, but represents it, and is not proposing to put the consumption site in her neighborhood. Wab Kinew doesn't live in this riding either, and he's not offering to put the consumption site among the stately grand homes and mansions of his Crescentwood neighborhood. That's the double standard here. Wealthy outsiders are telling people in Point Douglas that their concerns are not valid, that they should just suck it up, that they're the problem because they don't want this in their neighborhood. And it conveniently ignores legitimate concerns this community has about their safety and their quality of life. And I can tell you, I support safe consumption sites. They do save lives. But what I don't support is governments thinking they know better than the local communities. I don't support that the Kinew government is talking down to people of North Point Douglas. They're not listening to their concerns. They're dismissing their legitimate issues that they're raising, and they're not addressing any of them. The Kinew government does not have the consent of the community to locate this consumption site in Point Douglas, and it appears that they really don't care. They're not looking at any alternative sites where these collateral issues can be better managed. So what this story reveals about the Kinew government is important to all Manitobans. This is a government that is prepared to take people for granted who supported and voted for them in office. They are a top-down government that doesn't listen to certain communities, and they have a difficult time getting things done. It's been now almost 2 years in office, and this site is not up and running. And it was a key plank in their electoral platform, and they've now burned through half of their mandate. 1,000 more Manitobans have died from a preventable cause, and the government has no answers. And when challenged, the Kinew government demonizes and shames people that don't agree with them instead of trying to work with the community to address their very real issues. So there's lots more to talk about. I wanted to set the table. And first up, we're going to meet some of these North Point Douglas residents. They went to the Manitoba Legislature, met with Premier Kinew to talk about their concerns after he'd been dodging them for months. And as you hear, it didn't go well. Today, I'm joined by North Point Douglas residents, Karin, Bill Dentry, and Christine Kerouac. And we're talking about the Kinew government's plan to put safe consumption site in the North Point Douglas neighborhood and how members of the community feel about what's going on, how the government has gone about this, and whether or not they've been consulted. So I want to welcome all of you to the Ledge podcast. I want to start first and then go around the table. If you could sort of introduce how long you've been a North Point Douglas resident and how you sort of came into this discussion. I'll start with you, Karin.
I've been living in North Point Douglas for 16 years, and up until recently, just a great neighborhood to be living in. And then in the last year and a half, the consumption site was being presented as a place to put into the Point Douglas neighborhood. And this caused neighbors for alarm. It was just something that we weren't interested in. And so got involved that way with other community members.
Okay, we're going to explore that more. How about you, Bill?
Yeah, I've lived in North Point Douglas for about 15 years, and I've found it to be a very caring and exciting community to live in. And that's the main reason I chose it as my place to live.
Okay. And Christine?
I moved to North Point Douglas and purchased my first house in 2020. So I moved there right at the pandemic.
And so I guess I want to start off with is community. Why do you have concerns about the safe consumption site?
That's a big question with a lot of layers that I think the Kinew government has simplified for their purposes. Mm-hmm. And that's become quite clear over the course of since it was sort of found out and the process started, which was duplicitous to begin with, in my opinion.
What are you seeing? Maybe I'll put the question a different way. Because you've had a taste of a consumption site because there's the Sunshine House mobile unit that has been operating in your community for the last number of years. Is that?
As we do a lot of harm reduction, and there are 78, I just want to say, harm reduction organizations in the downtown and Point Douglas area. 78. That's an awful lot.
So your community isn't unfamiliar with the harm reduction model and what happens. And I guess I'm curious for people who don't live in your neighborhood, how has it changed in the last 5 years? How are things like living there? And why have you become so concerned that people who are not involved in politics have felt the need to get into politics? I'm wondering who would like to start us off.
I don't think any of us want to be in politics, but there is no other way to address this. That's who we have to go to. That's who's giving it to us. And so we have to push back.
Because we have to talk to those who are making those decisions.
Right.
I mean, low-income areas like Point Douglas, often decisions are made about them, for them, without them.
Right.
And that is pretty common. Point Douglas is an extremely diverse area with a lot of different kinds of people living and working in a lot of different kinds of areas and jobs, creatives and writers and labor workers and lots of different types of people and interior designers and, from all walks of life. If you walk around our area, the houses reflect exactly the differences of the people that I really enjoy actually from the area. And again, like Karin said, I have no interest in being a politician, especially having seen what you're going to have to give up in terms of your personal morals and ethics in order to climb that ladder. And I'm really not interested in that.
So what I want to get is some sense of how, Bill, have you seen the neighborhood change in the last few years? And why has the alarm been sort of raised with you that a safe consumption site will actually make things even worse?
Sure, I can give you lots of ways that the neighborhood has changed. When I first came to the neighborhood, if I walked through Point Douglas on a weekend or an evening, I'd find all kinds of kids playing in the park, on the swings, on whatever. Walk through the neighborhood now, you won't see kids playing there anymore. They're not in the splash pads. Why aren't they there? Because the parents are afraid of what happens when their kids see drug dealers and drug users there sitting right beside their kids at a picnic table using. And consequently, you shouldn't be surprised when the parents say you can't go to that dangerous area anymore. I've seen other changes. When I moved into the neighborhood, there were no encampments. You might see a few people occasionally on the riverbank, but you didn't see large numbers of people down there at all. Now it's encampment city. When I moved into the neighborhood, I didn't have to worry about where I was walking. Used needles were not lying everywhere. Now, I met a couple, I guess, employed by the city, walking through the park, wearing their bags, or carrying their bags and so on, and dumping sharps into their bags to take them away. And they'd been there for about an hour and a half, and they'd picked up over 200 of these things. I mean, it's no surprise that parents don't really want their kids playing in a park that's used as a garbage dump. And if you walk down the riverbank where the people live, the homeless people live, it's one immense garbage dump. Some of the homeless people living down at the north end on the riverbank, north end of Michel Join Park, took a real effort to clean up the garbage. 3 people in particular came and were cleaning up. And the police came down. We have a couple of policemen who walk through our neighborhood fairly regularly, and they walked down there. And they told a number of the other residents that they were seeing who were being garbage dumpers as opposed to garbage cleaners. And they asked them to move down the riverbank, which those people did. That would be about 12 days ago. And they asked for help getting that garbage taken away by the city. So I phoned 311, which resulted in the city giving me my placebo, that little ticket they give you to tell you you can track what's not happening. And the police came back to check, and they phoned in to get, and they said, they gave the date and everything else, and again, nobody came, and so on. So I haven't gone down this morning. I should have gone down and checked, but the garbage is probably still there. It's hard to get the city to do things, and the people are going to the bathroom everywhere. When you walk down through there, you better watch where you put your feet unless you're into human feces. I just find the whole thing frustrating. I'm sorry.
North Point Douglas is unique because it's almost entirely engulfed by river. And it's not new that rivers and lakes and bodies of water attract all sorts of life, which it always has from millennia, right? So those are some of the facts of our experiences, what Bill's talking about. But I think about the ideologies that have brought us to this particular place. And that is a difference of how we see homeless people and a difference of how they see themselves and how the government has decided to deal with people that require government help. And that's really, I think, what's underlying a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing that the government and Premier Kinew just doesn't want to really talk about honestly. And that's the problem that I see.
Yeah.
When I do want to explore that, but I just want to bring Karin into the conversation. So 16 years, what have your observations been of how things have changed?
I agree with what both Christine and Bill said, the amount of garbage. You were speaking about the consumption site. I don't know how that would change the neighborhood at all. In fact, make it worse. It's not dealing with the problem. It's just another Band-Aid. And what's to say they're even going to go there? Why? Why would they?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I've spoken to lots of addicts, and I've actually asked them, because I talk to addicts every day, all the time, in the park and along Rover where, I walk. And like, would you go? Why? I can use it at this park bench right here. Why would I go? People have become more emboldened to use in public, and there's a lot of backlash of saying, well, people should not be shamed. It's not about shaming people, but people have become much more used to using openly, setting out everything on a table in the park beside the playground, because they're not challenged whatsoever. And so why would they walk all the way to the Disraeli Bridge when they can openly use in the comfort of the park, in the beauty of the park?
Right. Well,
I can tell you why they would walk there. Because as soon as we get a safe consumption site, you have users, and users need dealers, and dealers will go in order to sell their product.
And that's what I heard. One of the issues is the concern is that you've created a magnet.
Yeah.
And so the drug dealers and the users will go into the area. And then, of course, then you now need money to pay for those drugs. And how do you get that? Well,
you steal.
You go
So we
into
have
the
a
neighboring
statistic
community.
that we brought to Bernadette and the Aboriginal Health and Wellness's attention during the first consultation that we were not invited to, that we crashed. So you have a consumption site, so you have users. Say a user needs $15 to $20 a day, right, to use. These are people who largely don't have vehicles, they have bicycles, so they stay in the area. So say the consumption site conservatively serves what they call clients, say 400 come through those doors per day. That money has to be gotten somewhere. We already have a problem with store boosting in stores that are around Point Douglas. And that money comes from items that are merchandise that they trade or sell from houses and from properties that are in their area. That's just common sense, of which Bernadette did not have an answer to. So you're looking at $6,000+ that they require. Where do you think that money is coming from? And it's coming from crime economy. Western Scrap, we have some other problematic businesses in the area that support crime economy in our area directly, right down the street, and sell their stuff for metal and anything they can get their hands on. It's not nailed down. Just ask Karin. Come into your yard and boldly. They don't care that they're on camera. They don't care that there's fences, because they know that the repercussions are going to be minimal, if none, once they get into the system.
We've heard about the challenges in the neighborhood and your belief that the consumption site will exacerbate those challenges. When did you first hear about the Disraeli site, and how was the community consulted? Karin, you can speak to this?
Yes, the community, an email was sent from Aboriginal Health and Wellness to the Point Douglas Residents Committee asking for a meeting, to which the chair and the secretary were going to meet, but then realized, well, we couldn't speak for the community. We didn't know what this was about. So we asked for a community consultation, and just sort of kept being blown off. And finally, we just ended up organizing our own community meeting at the community center, of which Aboriginal Health and Wellness were invited. But one of the responses is that they wanted the key stakeholders to be there. And our response was, everyone in Point Douglas is a key stakeholder. And so if they're not there, who are 2-3 people from a board to make decisions for a community? So when we did hold the community meeting, we handed out surveys for people to fill out, of course. And we also had information up of not pros and cons, but just for a lot of people, this was the first they heard about it. And we just wanted for people to have as much information as we ourselves had.
Have some transparency.
Exactly. So it wasn't a case of trying to put them into a certain way of thinking. It was up to them to make their own decisions. We didn't even have a discussion. They just sat down in tables, paper and pen, and wrote their responses and how they felt about it. And it was...
Which Aboriginal Health and Wellness and Bernadette never did
which
in the
they
community.
are supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so we took it upon
And now
ourselves.
you're talking about the federal guidelines for consultation.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. So we did our own community consultation, and they'd never asked us for it.
for that information, those results of what people actually thought and, how they would respond. And that was, like we were saying, it was not about putting people in a yay or nay.
No.
It was just, what do you think? Here's the facts. What do you think? This is what's going to happen.
So the community had to organize their own
Yep.
consultation. Now, since that, has the government ever reached out to actually hear from the community?
It took months and months for the government to actually have.
Well, but it's always
Consultations.
us
Yeah.
contacting them,
Yeah.
hounding them.
Yeah.
It's never been on their initiative to actually invite us. And when they did, it was only because of the pressure. So, no.
So they started to have consultations, and not in Point Douglas. They started to hold them on Pacific there at that sports plex. And the first consultation, which was an invite only, very small, Karin and I and a couple other people went and asked some pretty pointed questions of which they didn't have any answers to. And it was clear that the people that they invited to that consultation were sort of all on the same side, except for us.
What were your questions, and what didn't you get answered?
Well, one of our residents who owns a lot of rental properties had asked questions about what have you done with all the other data that you have available to you from other provinces that have had to shut down due to certain problems systematically across the country. And why aren't you using that data? And the response I remember very clearly from Bernadette was, well, we're going to do it the Manitoba way. And when asked, well, what does that mean? She had no answer. So she seemed to think that there was some unique way that Manitoba government was going to be dealing with this. What that is so far, I haven't seen it, because all they've done is Aboriginal Health and Wellness, I remember, had said, well, you can easily come up with other stats as if you can form facts that service one side or the other. And I'm not interested in either side. I don't like to be characterized in either side, and I resent and I reject that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because there does seem to be a bit of an attitude that if you're against a safe consumption site, that you're ill-informed, or you're acting in bad faith, or you're a NIMBY person.
You're a NIMBY.
And when we were talking before
which is not in my backyard, for those.
Right, yeah, thank you. And we were talking just before we turned the recorder on about how everybody in your neighborhood actually interacts with the homeless community and people. And I want you to sort of share your thoughts about this, about, is it fair that the people that are opposed to this are uncaring or callous, that
Of
don't
course
have
not. Of course, the short answer, no.
No,
I mean,
absolutely
obviously.
not. We've done many things. My wife and I have helped people who were on the riverbank get off the riverbank. And we did it at that time. The first person that we helped was a young couple that were stuck there. And I got a hold of Miriam Willis at St. Boniface Street Links, and she actually got them housing.
Right away.
That time, right away. And we turned around, and many of us walk through and check the encampments on a regular basis, basically doing wellness checks and encouraging people to not leave their garbage everywhere and so on, Yeah, so when people say we don't care, it's just not true. It's not correct. And
it's usually some people who are living without those problems on a daily basis. And I think what you're seeing is a reaction from residents who have already, this isn't new. The safe consumption site is new, but there's been this activity for quite some time, for like 5-6 years now in the neighborhood. And I think that residents who are living there have participated in harm reduction themselves. When something is stolen, when it needs to be replaced, when a car window is broken multiple times, 4 times in a month, who pays for that? The residents have to keep paying for that. So when people talk about survival crime, well, it's okay because people are in a really, really dark place. Yes, people are in a really, really dark place, but I can agree with that and also say they shouldn't be stealing from people in low-income areas because of that. That's not fair either. And so there are many who will characterize, oh, well, you must be a NIMBY. No, not at all. Although there are people in the city who go, no way, I don't know what I'd do if I had this in my backyard, which because of such a small geographical area that all of this stuff is crammed into on top of each other. That's why we're feeling these effects, but just haven't said anything.
Yeah.
Part of them is that politically, because many of those people are Indigenous people, and people just don't want to say things about the state of what a lot of people that are Indigenous are going through and getting involved, because that's become a political conversation.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the facts. Those are the realities. And there's many, many Indigenous people actually in our community who work in the harm reduction space who don't agree with this, with enabling as part of, and it's interesting to say that when Bernadette was asked, it's funny now that I look at it during the consultation, and she was asked, well, what harm reduction do you have? And it's not just going to be a place where you can go use. That's wrong. But, well, how many treatment beds? How many?
Yeah, we never got answers.
Never
to those
got,
questions
it was
at
like,
all.
oh, well, I don't really want to talk about that, and I don't have answers to that. But we've got, we'll have security guards that will be on the premises, 2 security guards. So I'm just like,
Basically,
and an 8-foot fence.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to stop people from coming out into the neighborhood subsequently after. It's like, that's not our problem.
Right.
yeah, she treats it as if that little tiny spot that's the safe consumption site isn't. That's all we're talking about. And in her mind, I think the people who are homeless, who are using drugs and so on, they're nowhere near there. So it's not a problem. When we asked her, specifics, that's what you were getting at there. We asked specifics, what's going to happen? Okay, you got a safe consumption site. Well, we've got drug dealers coming in. What are you going to do to protect us?
We'll do everything we have to. Well, what is that?
What does that mean?
It's all very abstract, and enough time has come by that they should have some specifics about how are the police involved. That's another thing that has been unclear right from the get-go. Bernadette's been always quoted often as saying, we're working with police, we have plans with police. You talk to police, we don't know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So, Bill, you were saying that I think everybody understands you love this neighborhood, but it has some challenges, and that it's not like you don't have solutions. It's not like the community isn't saying, you know what, we can use this or that resources, which will make differences in our lives. Can you speak to that a little bit? What does North Point Douglas need, and what would you like to see from governments for resource-wise to sort of make the quality of life better for the people there?
Well, that's a tough one to speak to. I think that we'd like to start by getting correct information and an appropriate amount. It's really hard to say what is appropriate to do if people haven't told you what their proposal is. So we're still way out. We have no idea what they're going to do. Many of the people who live on the riverbank are either drug users, and some of them are come and go drug users. They even bring their kids down to the riverbank.
And they have housing too. Then they have housing and then go to the riverbank too.
Yeah. And then the city brings additional people down and gives them tents and equipment to use. And it's right on their policy that the city can do that. That's what that document says. The city has as a guide. We've got people who've got mental health issues that are living on the riverbank, and that's
I'm walking through with schizophrenia and with some serious mental.
Yeah, and when we ask Bernadette Smith about this and what the impact is and how that's going to be addressed, that's not part of the problem.
She hasn't dealt with it so far. That's the problem is that she hasn't dealt with it so far. And so now you're bringing this, I don't trust you. I don't trust what you're saying because you have not shown, other than in your photo ops and WAB Kinew as well, anything other than, I don't know, which is why the meeting with WAB Kinew that Karin and Bill were part of was so disheartening.
So frustrating.
Well, sure. Let's get into that. So my understanding was that...
and I just wanted to point out that when you talk and ask addicts what they need, because I often do that, we're not going to talk about, gee, what'd you do today? I ask, what do you need? Tell me what you need. And it's already been proven that there are not enough beds and detox beds and long-term treatment.
And we still don't have an answer from the government about that.
They do, and people are telling us when we need beds for people when they're ready. So you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. On the one side, you're saying you got to let people come and decide for themselves when they're ready to get help. Fine. But then when they are on this side of their mouth, they're saying, sorry, you're going to have to wait 6 months to get a bed. So you can't do both and then pretend like you're really solving the problem.
And that's really what happens at River Point. If an addict comes in and says, I'm ready, I need some help and I need it, they take his name and say, well, we'll call you in.
Yeah. And then
2
so in the
months, 3
meantime,
months.
what are they doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the time they get called, maybe they don't want to come back.
Right. So I know Karin and Bill, you actually came down to the Manitoba Legislature, and I was in the House that day. I was sitting and I watched the exchange, and you were up in the gallery. I'm wondering if you can tell us what you saw that day. And again, as an MLA, I'm absolutely fascinated about how people see us doing our work. And maybe I could start with you, Karin.
Karin, maybe you can say that we've been watching WAB on and Bernadette on Question Period for some time.
Right.
Childish. It blew my mind that this is our governance, and this is how they're acting. There were children or school kids, I guess, in the upper part, and what you're modeling to them, as far as these are serious issues that are being brought up, and it's joking and it's egos.
What did you think about when Wab described himself as "I am the king" and so on?
I don't even remember that part.
I've met with the king. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Not I'm the king.
Yeah. So, Bill, you're a former teacher, and as Karin had pointed out, there was school children and lots of groups up in the gallery that day. And just to give some context, the opposition party was asking some tough questions about the consumption site, and Premier Kinew had to answer them. And what did you think of that exchange and the quality of his answers? And were you getting served by your politicians that afternoon?
No, we weren't getting served because he didn't answer the questions. And that's the problem that we're addressing with Bernadette Smith as well. I don't feel he answers the questions.
And ask where the opposition is getting their information from.
Well, from the community, I guess.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. So, but one thing that did come out of that, and I want to delve into a little bit, is the opposition shamed Wab Kinew into actually meeting you guys. You didn't have a scheduled meeting.
That is exactly correct.
And you were able to meet with the Premier after Question Period that day. And Bill, I wonder if you can pick up the story from there and what happened.
No, we went up to a meeting room, the group of us, and basically started asking questions. And I feel that we weren't getting answers. And at one point, I don't know if we've already covered this or not, but we were basically told we didn't represent the community.
Well, Karin, if you can say exactly what the phrase.
So is this the Premier talking to you?
This is the Premier.
This is the Premier.
And what exactly did he say to you guys?
He was asked a question by one of the residents about the safe consumption.
There was a lot going on because there was a lot of emotion. And so at the beginning of the very beginning, he schooled us once again on everything that we have heard ad nauseum for months on end. We didn't need to, we know what you're telling us. And then at one point he said, let's be clear, there is currently no consumption site in Point Douglas.
Yes,
and someone spoke up and said, well, yes, there is. And he said, no, let me be clear. There's no, can we agree on that? This isn't verbatim, but this is what I remember. And again, it was mentioned, well, yes, you have MOPS, which is the Mobile Overdose Clinic. And at that point, he said, either you let me continue or this meeting's over.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he didn't say that.
Yeah, because obviously,
Along those lines.
yeah, you're talking about the Sunshine House had a mobile camper
Yes.
that was acting as a consumption site, and they recently got into an accident, and it's sort of been knocked out of service. But that had been operating not only for a little while, but for years in the Point Douglas area, wasn't it not?
Yeah. And it does go around, of course, but yes. And so to say that there wasn't a consumption site was misinformation. And then when we tried to correct him, he dismissed us to the point of where if we didn't play the game
To his rules.
then he would just leave.
Okay, and there was some talk about his view that you guys weren't actually representatives of the community. And do you recall that conversation?
Yes, I wish I had the words exactly, but it was, and you think that you represent the community?
It was a question
It was a question, and that's pretty much exactly
and that was
what he
the
said.
answer,
Yeah.
which was very telling to me.
Yeah, and then he put that big smile on his face, which he loves to do, and the answer was clear that we were just out to lunch.
And it was that arrogance that was, interesting to me. Like, who then do you think, if there are people here coming from this community, who is it that you are specifically referring to as community then? That was the question that I was, and he said, so from what my friends had to say, extremely smug and very arrogant and saying, oh, you think you're part of this community? Yes, we do. That was where I could see that this politician had an agenda. And he was being pushed on that agenda, and it didn't fit into the vision of what was convenient for him to use as Point Douglas as a community. Was which community? Well, which community then are you speaking to?
Right. So what was the atmosphere like? Because this sounds rather tense.
Oh,
Yeah, it was.
It was.
It was tense because this was, we had asked to see him since November and had never received any kind of a response. The fact that we had an audience with him was our opportunity to speak.
and he made sure you felt that way too.
There was, because we had a lot to say, and it felt like he just spoke either over us, but at one point he did say, look, if the community doesn't want it, we're not going to put
That's
it
what
there.
it was.
He said
And
that
then
many
the
times.
response
Yeah.
someone gave, he said, and you think you're the community.
Yeah.
To which, well, yes, who are you talking to? You're talking to the people that come and work for 8 hours, and when they're burnt out or whatever, they normally get to go to their home and rest and relax.
Right.
So for us that have jobs and we come home, we don't necessarily get to rest and relax.
Right.
And this is just one issue in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So we,
Now, I understand the federal government, you have to apply, and on the application, you have to put an address about where you want to have one of these sites.
Yeah.
Have you learned any information? Has there been a subsequent or new application with a different address on it than the one that you're obviously concerned about?
not that we're aware of.
Well, Bernadette is always in these, it seems like she comes with a script to these consultations. And when you go to several of them, like we did, you get to learn the script too. And her responses to certain questions that she has learned to give. So she's always said, oh, this isn't set in stone. This isn't set in stone. She loves to say that. We're looking at a lot of different sites. She's never suggested any others. We're not aware of any others than 200 Disraeli. We do know that if they apply again, they will have to start this process all over again with
It's
a
already
new
been
address.
2 years, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that there were any other options because they put all those eggs in this basket, in the Disraeli basket, and we're going to do everything they could to push it through, regardless of what the community thought. Everyone in the community, addicts, harm reduction centers, and residents and businesses. We're all part of this community, but they weren't interested in what some of those people thought because they're getting an awful lot of money from the Kinew government to do this. And I had said, and lots of people have said, why don't you really make it a long-term treatment facility then? Use that $270 million, I think it was, I think that might be the number, to actually do something that isn't just a temporary basis, but something that supports people long-term. People are saying we're dying without beds right away. People have died already. Families have said, we tried to get them help and it wasn't available. So why aren't you looking at that problem and instead pushing through your own agenda?
And we can't get concrete information on what they're doing with respect to that. I've learned from talking to people and so on that there's a good possibility that they will build a 400-bed treatment site, basically on where the old Carling Brewery used to be on the corner of Main and Redwood. But I can't get any information from anyone about, is this really going to happen? And then somebody said, no, they're going to build it, but it's only going to be for Aboriginals that are coming down to Winnipeg from the north for treatment. So
we don't know.
We have people living here and they don't get treatment, I guess,
Right.
you know.
Karin, you wanted to jump in here?
I just wanted to say I didn't go to a meeting about that and the treatment center. And yes, it is only for First Nation people coming down for treatment. And if they are unable to continue with their treatment, they are just left on their own to get back to wherever, which means they just have to go down the river and
Find a place to sleep.
So how did your meeting end with the Premier? Was anything resolved?
no.
And what were your overall thoughts? Like, did you feel you were heard, that something
No.
positive happened?
No, I don't think we were heard at all.
No.
And
we
that's
were-
our big complaint with both Bernadette and
Yeah.
Wab Kinew is they
It's just
say
this-
they have a meeting, but it's a one-way meeting. They do the talking and we do the listening.
So I'm listening to your story, and obviously, I mean, people would be concerned. can you trust the government at this point when it comes to dealing with this safe consumption site? And where do we go from here?
If you trust the government in terms of let's look at their legacy so far, and I like to say I was on the hiring committee for Bernadette and Wob, and I hired them both. That's what an election is. They're being hired to do a job, and I voted for both of them. And so far, to come in and keep giving lip service and saying, we're going to do, when they haven't done so far, that's a big problem for me. So I got no trust in, and as a Métis person myself, I have really been disappointed in what seems like politicians more interested in optics and their social media and less interested in really doing the hard work. And when I see people, particularly Indigenous politicians, using people that are in the positions of a lot of people that are struggling and suffering and dying to step up their own agenda and advance their own careers, there's nothing that's more despicable to me than that. And that's what it looks like so far to me. So I will never vote for Wob Kinew, and I don't care how many, regalia outfits he has.
Okay. And Karin, can this relationship be fixed with the community? Can the government repair this, reset this?
Oh, I welcome the opportunity for them to come and actually listen to us and give us some really concrete steps as to how to go about doing that.
But when they see us in that pocket of NIMBYs anyway, they're not interested in what people who are owning homes. And so far of what I've seen, they have increased the division that's already present between people who are living there, been there a long time, and people who are believing that the land is theirs, people who are making decisions in altered states that are unhealthy. A lot of people have said in our neighborhood, we feel like prisoners. And if we say anything, we're called these. But it was clear from that meeting with Wob Kinew, boy, that's the way he sees people in this community in Point Douglas already.
Bill, I'll give you the last word. Can this get fixed?
Well, I hope it can get fixed. I was also an NDP supporter. And when I heard about what they were going to do for the homeless people, I thought, fantastic. We've got a government that's going to address issues of homelessness, users of narcotics and so on. And I thought this was fantastic. But now I feel very disillusioned. I would be surprised if it can get fixed. I don't expect it to get fixed unless we do something in our neighborhood ourselves. I don't think Mr. Kinew delegates to people. I think if you look at him on the news, and I watch the news all the time, he's there basically speaking for every issue he is. He must be an expert in absolutely everything, because if you have a lot of people who have been elected to do jobs, let them do their jobs. I don't see that happening.
Well, that's a good way to end. I want to thank Karin, Bill, and Christine for coming on the pod. And this was an important conversation, and I hope Manitobans learn from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So there are some concerning takeaways from Wob Kinew's encounter with the Point Douglas residents. This is a government that will tell you they're listening, but they don't actually hear. They don't change what they're doing despite Manitobans telling them they're going in the wrong direction. And we have a premier who discounts or dismisses their concerns and views them as not being enlightened enough, and that only he has all the answers, even though the decisions he's making is directly impacting their neighborhood and their lives. It tells us that the premier is only prepared to actually listen to some Manitobans, either powerful elites or experts, and not everyday Manitobans who actually have to live with the consequences of his political decisions. They don't matter, they don't count, and they are going to be taken for granted by this premier. Now, the issue is not whether or not we need a safe consumption site. I think the answer to that is very much that we do. The issue is, where can we put it? And are there supports and resources in place to mitigate the collateral consequences that these sites will bring to whatever community that they're found in? And can we house it in a place where families and residential neighborhoods won't be directly impacted? And we're not seeing any discussion with this government about this. There's no awareness, no reaction. Basically, it's an with us or against us type of argument. If you're against a safe consumption site for any reason, you must be an ignorant bigot, and sort of what's wrong with you? And when you start off a conversation like that, there's no dialogue. And without dialogue, there's no understanding. Without understanding, the government will absolutely get this wrong, and they will not have the support of the community with whatever they end up doing. So Kinew is giving a masterclass about how governments fail, how to turn a community that was supportive of you off a worthy initiative, and how to make this policy about yourself instead of the people it's meant to serve. Not only does this have to serve Manitobans who are suffering from addictions, this policy also has to serve the wider Manitoban community. And so far, the Kinew government does not get this. They've shown that they simply are not concerned about certain areas. In fact, one of the residents described them as feeling that they live in one of these dumping grounds. You've often heard the expression sacrifice zones. Well, the Kinew government is creating sacrifice zones in Manitoba when it comes to certain public policies, and I'll have more to say about that in future podcasts. There are always trade-offs in politics. There's always winners and losers, and the pattern that seems to be emerging is that people that Kinew is prepared to sacrifice tend to be vulnerable communities, middle and working class families. That's it for this week on the pod. I want to thank Bill, Christine, and Karin for sharing their stories with us. We'd love to hear your feedback. Please reach out to us. We're on the socials, and you can reach out to my office directly. Talk to you soon.